Welcome to our deep dive today into the art world between World War I and World War II.
Oh, an era
Yeah.
of immense change.
So we've got this presentation here titled Art Between the World Wars. And I gotta say, just glancing through it, I'm already hooked.
Yeah, it's
Like, you wouldn't believe
it's fast.
how much artistic innovation happened
Yeah,
in those 2 decades.
absolutely.
It's almost like the chaos of the time
Mm,
just fueled this
yeah.
this burst of creativity.
It does make you wonder
Yeah.
how artists take global upheaval and,
Mm.
and turn it into these really powerful artistic statements.
Powerful artistic statement.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really powerful artistic statements.
So today we're going to uncover how, like, these major historical events, I'm talking, the Russian Revolution, the Great Depression,
Hmm.
even the rise of photography and film, how all of that reshaped artistic expression.
We're going to see a real shift from artists trying to perfectly capture reality to expressing something much deeper about the human experience in these tumultuous times.
Okay, so to really get this, we need to picture the world between 1918 and 1939.
Mm,
It's not just about, recovering from one war, embracing for another.
right.
It's shattered economies,
Mm.
new ideologies
Mm.
popping up everywhere. I mean, it was unsettling, to say the least.
Imagine living in a world where everything you thought was solid is suddenly very shaky,
Yeah.
and that sense of instability is really at the core of the art from this period.
It makes you wonder how anyone could create anything beautiful
Oh, yeah.
amidst all that.
Oh, but they did, and it's fascinating to see how the artistic styles evolved.
Okay.
So before World War I, artists were mostly focused on representing the world realistically.
Mm.
Think detailed landscapes,
Okay.
lifelike portraits, almost like a photograph.
Oh, right, like capturing a perfect snapshot of what you see.
Exactly.
Okay.
But then World War I happened, and the sheer brutality of it forced artists to confront something deeper
Yeah.
than just the surface of things.
Right.
Suddenly, traditional art felt inadequate
Hmm.
to express the horrors they'd witnessed and the uncertainty of the future.
So would they just give up on art altogether?
No, they revolutionized it.
Oh, wow.
They moved away from simply mirroring reality and started exploring abstract forms,
Okay.
jarring colors and perspectives that challenged those traditional ideas of beauty.
Oh, it's like they were trying to make sense of a world gone mad by bending the rules of art itself.
Precisely.
Mhm.
And that's where those major historical events we mentioned come in.
Okay.
Each one, the war, the Russian Revolution, the Great Depression, they all left their mark on the art of this era.
Let's start with World War I.
Okay.
You mentioned how brutal it was.
Yeah,
Did that trauma actually show up in the art itself?
absolutely. Take Otto Dix's series of Prince der Krieg.
Yeah.
It's a visceral, unflinching depiction of the horrors of trench warfare, the mutilated bodies, the psychological toll. Dix himself was a soldier in the war. So he wasn't just observing from a distance.
Right.
He was living through it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And he used those graphic images
Yeah.
to convey the reality of war in a way that words just couldn't. I'm guessing that's where some of the shift towards distortion and
Yeah.
emotional intensity comes from.
Exactly. Traditional art, with its focus on beauty and harmony, just couldn't contain those raw, chaotic emotions of the
Yeah.
post-war world.
Okay.
Artists needed new tools, new visual languages to express this new reality.
So how does the Russian Revolution fit into all of this?
Okay.
It was happening around the same time, right?
Yes, and it had a very different impact on the art world.
Cool. Yeah.
While World War I led to disillusionment and a rejection of traditional values,
Mm.
the Russian Revolution sparked hope. A
Oh,
belief in the possibility of radical social change.
so instead of turning inward and expressing trauma,
Right.
artists were looking outward towards a new society.
Exactly. They saw art as a tool for social commentary,
Hmm.
for promoting the ideals of the revolution, for building a new world.
Oh, yeah.
You see this in the work of artists like El Lissitzky with his bold geometric compositions and revolutionary slogans.
It almost sounds like propaganda using art to spread a message.
Well, it was certainly politically charged, but it was also incredibly innovative.
Okay.
Artists were experimenting with new forms of visual communication, blurring the lines between art and design,
Hmm.
aesthetics and ideology.
So we've got World War I leading to disillusionment and a focus on inner turmoil,
Right?
and the Russian Revolution inspiring a more optimistic, outwardly focused art.
Yeah.
Where does the Great Depression fit into this picture?
The Great Depression brought its own brand of despair, not just in Russia, but globally.
Really?
It was a time of economic hardship, unemployment, and social unrest. And you see all of that reflected in the art.
I can imagine the imagery getting pretty bleak.
In some cases, yes.
Yeah.
Think of American artists like Grant Wood, whose paintings of rural life during the Depression captured a sense of resilience but also hardship. Or Dorothea Lange's photographs, which documented the plight of migrant workers and the human cost of economic collapse.
It's like the focus shifts again, this time towards everyday people and their struggles.
Precisely. The art of the Great Depression reflects a deep empathy for the suffering of the masses.
Okay.
A social conscience that we see across different artistic styles and movements.
So we've got these three major historical events,
Yeah.
each shaping the art world in its own way.
Mm-hmm.
But we also mentioned the rise of new technologies like photography and film.
Right.
How did that impact the artists who were used to working with paint and canvas?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
For some artists, the rise of photography felt like a threat.
Really?
After all, why paint a realistic portrait
Yeah.
when a camera can do it faster and arguably better?
It must have felt like the rug was pulled out from under them.
In a way, it was.
Yeah.
But instead of giving up,
Okay.
many artists saw it as a challenge, an opportunity to redefine the purpose of art.
So they began to explore what painting could do
Exactly.
that photography couldn't.
Exactly.
Give me an example.
Well, think about how a photograph captures a single moment frozen in time.
Okay.
Painters, on the other hand, could use color brush strokes and composition to convey a feeling, an atmosphere, a deeper truth that went beyond a simple representation of reality.
So they started focusing more on expressing emotions and ideas rather than just replicating what they saw.
Exactly.
And that shift in thinking helped pave the way
Yeah.
for the abstract and non-representational art
Exactly.
that would come to define much of the interwar period.
Yeah.
It's like photography forced artists to look inward, to find new ways of seeing and expressing the world.
It did.
And I bet this is where those avant-garde movements we
Yeah.
keep hearing about come in.
Absolutely.
They were all about breaking the rules, right?
And they were a direct response to this feeling of upheaval, this sense that the old ways of doing things just weren't working anymore.
Yeah.
They were questioning everything, art, society, even reality itself.
So let's dive into some of these avant-garde movements.
Okay.
What was Dadaism all about?
Dadaism was a rejection of logic and reason
Okay.
in a world that seemed to have gone completely mad.
Oh, wow.
It was anti-art, anti-war, anti-establishment,
Oh.
basically anti-everything.
Wow. They sound like a rebellious bunch.
They were.
How did that rebellion actually manifest in their
Yeah.
art?
They used humor, irony, and absurdity to
Ah.
challenge traditional notions of art and beauty.
Okay.
They created collages from everyday objects, staged provocative performances, and even destroyed their own artwork as a form of protest.
So it's less about technical skill
Yeah.
and more about making a statement, even if that statement was confusing or nonsensical.
Exactly. Dadaists embraced chaos and chance, believing that meaning could be found in the unexpected and the irrational.
So instead of trying to make sense of a senseless world,
Right?
they reflected that senselessness back at society.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It was a way of saying, if the world is illogical, then our art will be illogical too.
Okay.
And in doing so, they challenged the very definition of what art could be.
It sounds like they were trying to shake people out of their complacency,
Yeah.
to make them think differently about the world around them.
Exactly. Dadaism was a shock to the system, a wake-up call to a society that was clinging to outdated values and beliefs.
So if Dadaism was all about rejecting logic
Yeah.
and embracing chaos, what about Surrealism?
Okay.
They were into dreams and the unconscious mind, right?
Yes. Surrealism emerged from the ashes of Dadaism, but took a different approach.
Right.
Instead of rejecting reality outright,
Yeah.
they sought to explore the hidden world of the unconscious, the realm of dreams, desires, and fears.
Okay, that sounds a bit trippy. How did they actually translate those ideas into art?
Think melting clocks,
Yeah.
floating eyeballs,
Uh-huh.
bizarre creatures. They juxtaposed familiar objects in unexpected ways, creating dreamlike landscapes that defied logic and reason.
Right.
They wanted to unlock the power of the subconscious and reveal the hidden meanings beneath the surface of everyday life.
So if Dadaism was a slap in the face,
Yeah, a good one.
Surrealism was more like a journey
Right.
into the depths of the human psyche.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Dadaism was about shock and disruption, while Surrealism was about exploration and revelation.
Hmm.
Both movements were radical in their own way,
Yeah.
challenging the boundaries of art and pushing audiences to see the world with fresh eyes.
This is all so fascinating.
Isn't it?
We've got artists responding to war,
Yeah.
revolution, and economic depression. And then we've got these avant-garde movements shaking things up even further. It's like the entire art world was in a state of constant flux.
It was an incredibly dynamic period, a melting pot of ideas and influences where artists were constantly pushing boundaries and experimenting with new forms of expression.
And we haven't even touched on the impact of technology yet.
I know, right? We've barely scratched the surface.
I can't wait to dive even deeper into all of this when we come back.
Stay tuned, because next we'll be exploring how specific artists and techniques brought these movements to life.
Okay.
Yeah. Welcome back. I'm excited to delve a little deeper into some of the specific techniques artists used during this period.
Okay.
It's one thing to talk about movements like Dadaism or Surrealism, but seeing how those ideas actually materialized, on canvas or in a sculpture is another thing entirely.
Yeah, you're telling me we've talked about this shift.
Yeah.
From realistic representation to something more abstract and emotional. But what does that actually look like?
Right.
How did artists use color or form or even the materials themselves to express those deeper ideas?
That's where the real magic happens.
Okay.
Let's take the evolution of portraiture as an example.
Okay.
Before World War I, a portrait was all about capturing a likeness, showing the subject in a flattering light. Think smooth brushstrokes, soft colors, an idealized image of the person.
Right, like those portraits of royalty you see in museums.
Exactly.
All about elegance and perfection.
But after the war, that approach just didn't resonate anymore. Artists like Edvard Munch, for example, were already exploring the darker side of human emotion in the years leading up to the war.
Okay.
And those themes became even more pronounced in the interwar period.
So how did Munch's portraits differ from those traditional idealized images?
Think about his most famous painting, The Scream.
Okay.
The figure's face is distorted, almost melting. The colors are jarring, and the entire composition evokes a feeling of anxiety and existential dread.
Wow.
That's a far cry from those serene royal portraits.
It's like the inner turmoil is bursting out of the canvas.
And
that was painted before the war even started.
Yes, Munch was a bit of a precursor to the
Okay.
Expressionist movement, which really took off after the war.
Okay.
Expressionists weren't interested in depicting reality faithfully. They wanted to capture the raw, subjective experience of emotion.
So instead of smooth brushstrokes and lifelike details,
Right.
we get thick, almost violent brushstrokes, distorted figures, and colors that feel jarring and unsettling.
Precisely. The technique itself becomes a way of expressing emotion.
Okay.
The thick paint application feels almost like a physical manifestation of inner turmoil. The distorted forms reflect a world that no longer feels stable or predictable.
And the jarring colors, I'm guessing those weren't chosen randomly either?
Of course not.
Okay.
Color plays a huge role in conveying emotion.
Right.
Think about how we use color in everyday language.
Yeah.
Feeling blue. Seeing red expressionists took those associations and amplified them, using color to heighten the emotional impact of their work.
So the techniques they used weren't just about aesthetics.
Right.
They were about conveying a message, a feeling and experience.
Exactly. And this is where those avant-garde movements we discussed earlier really come into their own.
Right.
Each one had its own unique set of techniques and approaches, but they were all united by this desire to push the boundaries of art and challenge traditional notions of beauty and representation.
All right, let's bring those avant-garde movements back into the picture.
Okay.
We talked about Dadaism and its rejection of logic and reason.
Right.
How did those ideas translate into specific artistic techniques?
Dadaists embraced chance and randomness in their art. They created collages from found objects, newspaper clippings, bits of string, anything they could get their hands on.
So it wasn't about creating something beautiful or aesthetically pleasing.
Right.
It was about disrupting expectations
Yeah.
and challenging the very definition of art.
Precisely. One of the most famous examples of this is Marcel Duchamp's fountain, which was literally just a urinal turned upside down and signed.
Right.
It caused a huge scandal at the time, but it also forced people to ask, what is art?
Right.
Who gets to decide?
It sounds like a prank, but also a pretty profound statement
It was both.
about art and its role in society.
Exactly. Dadaism was full of these kinds of gestures, provocative, irreverent, and often humorous.
Okay.
They were trying to shake people out of their complacency to make them question everything they thought they knew about art and the world around them.
Okay, so Dadaism was all about disruption and challenging conventions.
Yes.
What about Surrealism?
Okay.
How did they go about expressing those dreamscapes and unconscious desires?
Surrealists developed a whole range of techniques to tap into the subconscious.
Okay.
They used juxtaposition, placing unrelated objects side by side to create a sense of unease or disorientation. They distorted familiar forms, making them seem both recognizable and strangely alien. And they played with scale, making objects appear much larger or smaller than they actually were, creating a sense of dreamlike unreality.
It sounds like they were trying to create a visual language for the irrational, a way of translating dreams and fantasies into something tangible.
Exactly. And one of the most iconic examples of this is Salvador Dali's The Persistence of Memory. The melting clocks, the distorted landscape, the strange, almost biomorphic figures. It's a classic example of surrealist imagery designed to evoke a feeling of disorientation and wonder.
Yeah, I can see how that painting would stick in your mind. It's both beautiful and unsettling at the same time.
Exactly. And that's the power of surrealism. It taps into something primal, something beyond our conscious control. It reminds us that there's more to reality than what we see on the surface.
So we've got these incredibly innovative and thought-provoking movements emerging alongside these massive historical shifts. But we also mentioned the impact of technology. Specifically photography and film. How did those mediums influence the art world during this time?
The rise of photography and film had a profound impact on the art world, both challenging and inspiring artists in new ways. Photography in particular forced artists to rethink the very nature of representation. If a camera could capture reality with such precision, what was the point of painting, realistically?
So it was almost like photography made traditional painting obsolete.
Not quite. Some artists did see it that way and turned to abstraction as a way of distinguishing painting from photography. But others saw it as an opportunity to explore what painting could do that photography couldn't.
What do you mean?
Well, a photograph captures a single moment in time, frozen and static. But a painting can convey movement, emotion, atmosphere, things that go beyond a simple visual record.
So painting could still offer something unique, something that photography couldn't replicate.
Exactly. Artists began to experiment with color brushstrokes in composition in ways that emphasized the subjective experience of the artist rather than simply trying to replicate the world as it appeared.
So in a way, photography actually pushed painting.
It did.
Towards greater abstraction and expressiveness.
Precisely. It forced artists to find new ways of seeing and expressing the world, and that led to some incredible innovations. And then there was film, which opened up a whole new realm of artistic possibilities.
We talked earlier about how film was a brand new art form in the interwar period.
Brand new.
How did filmmakers embrace this new medium, and what kind of impact did it have?
Film offered a way to tell stories visually using moving images, sound, and editing techniques to create a truly immersive experience. Early filmmakers like Fritz Lang and Sergei Eisenstein were pioneers in this new medium, experimenting with camera angles, lighting, and montage to create powerful and unforgettable films.
I'm thinking of films like Metropolis and Battleship Potemkin. Those were groundbreaking for their time.
Absolutely. Those films pushed the boundaries of visual storytelling, exploring themes of social injustice, technological advancement, and the human condition. And they weren't just entertaining, they were works of art that had a profound impact on audiences.
It's fascinating to see how all of these different threads, historical events, artistic movements, technological innovations are all weaving together to create this incredibly rich tapestry of artistic expression.
And that's what makes this period so fascinating to study. It was a time of immense change and upheaval, but it was also a time of incredible creativity and innovation. Artists were responding to the challenges of their time in bold and unexpected ways, shaping the future of art in the process.
And speaking of shaping the future, we haven't talked much about how art from outside of Europe was responding to these global trends. We touched on the Harlem Renaissance, but were there other movements happening in different parts of the world?
Absolutely. The interwar period was a time of global exchange, and artistic ideas were flowing in all directions.
Okay.
While European modernism certainly had a huge influence, artists in other parts of the world were also developing their own unique styles and movements.
So it wasn't just a one-way street with Europe dictating the trends.
Not at all.
Okay.
It was a much more dynamic and multifaceted exchange.
Okay.
For example, in Mexico, artists like Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo were blending elements of European modernism with indigenous Mexican traditions, creating a vibrant and politically charged art form that celebrated Mexican identity.
So they were taking those European ideas and making them their own.
Exactly.
Infusing them with their own cultural heritage and experiences.
And that's what's so exciting about this period. It wasn't just about imitation, it was about adaptation and transformation. Artists around the world were taking inspiration from each other, creating a global dialogue that enriched and expanded the possibilities of art.
This is blowing my mind. I had no idea the art world was so interconnected during this time.
It was. And those connections continue to fascinate and inspire us today.
Right.
But before we get too carried away, let's take a moment to consider what all of this means for us now.
Okay.
Why should we care about the art of a bygone era?
That's a great question. We've been so caught up in the details, it's easy to forget that this all happened almost a century ago. So why does any of this matter today?
That's what we'll explore when we come back. Stay tuned.
Okay, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into art between the world wars. We've covered a lot of ground, from the historical context to the artistic movements to the impact of technology. It's been an incredible journey.
It really has. We've seen how artists grappled with war, revolution, economic depression, and even the rise of new technologies like photography and film. It was a period of immense change and creativity, a true turning point in the history of art.
But as we wrap up, I think the biggest question on my mind is, why does any of this matter to us today?
Yeah.
What can we in the 21st century learn from the art of this turbulent era?
That's a crucial question and one that gets to the heart of why we study art history at all. The art between the world wars, despite being created almost a century ago, still speaks to us in profound ways.
So it's not just about appreciating the aesthetics or understanding the historical context. There are actual lessons we can take away from this art and apply to our own lives.
Absolutely. Think about the themes we've been discussing: disillusionment after war, the struggle for social justice, the anxieties of rapid technological change. These are themes that are still incredibly relevant today, perhaps even more so in our current world.
It's like history doesn't repeat itself, but it definitely rhymes. We might be dealing with different specific challenges, but those underlying emotions, the anxieties, the hopes, they feel strangely familiar.
Precisely. And that's where the art of the interwar period can offer us a fresh perspective.
Okay.
It allows us to see how artists of the past grappled with similar challenges, how they channeled their emotions into their work, and how they used art as a tool for commentary, critique, and even resistance.
So it's not just about passively observing their art, but actively engaging with it, letting it challenge us. And maybe even using it to shape our own understanding of the world.
Exactly. Take, for example, the Dadaist movement.
Okay.
Their rejection of logic and reason in the face of the absurdity of war might seem extreme. But it reminds us of the importance of questioning authority, challenging the status quo, and using humor and satire to expose injustice.
It's like they were saying, don't just accept things blindly. Think critically, be skeptical, and don't be afraid to make some noise.
Precisely. And that spirit of critical thinking is so crucial in our own time, where we're bombarded with information from all sides. We need to be able to sift through the noise, identify bias, and form our own informed opinions. It's like a crash course in media literacy from a bunch of avant-garde artists.
And what about Surrealism? What can we learn from their exploration of dreams in the unconscious mind?
Surrealism encourages us to tap into our imagination, to explore the world beyond the rational and the everyday, in a world that can often feel too structured and predictable. Surrealism reminds us to embrace the unexpected, the illogical, the dreamlike. It's like a permission slip to let your mind wander and see the world with fresh eyes.
I love that idea of surrealism as a reminder to embrace the unexpected. It's so easy to get stuck in our routines and forget to look for the wonder in the world around us.
Exactly. And that sense of wonder and curiosity is essential for creativity, innovation, and problem solving.
Right.
It's what allows us to imagine new possibilities and come up with solutions that we might not have seen otherwise.
I'm also thinking about the technical innovations of the interwar period.
Yeah.
The way artists embraced new technologies like photography and film, incorporating them into their work, is a reminder that art is constantly evolving. It's not static. It's a living, breathing thing that adapts to the tools and technologies of its time.
That's such an important point. And it's so relevant for us today.
Right.
We're living in an era of rapid technological advancement with new tools and platforms emerging all the time.
Right.
The artists of the interwar period show us that we don't need to fear these changes, but embrace them, to experiment with them and find new ways to express ourselves through them.
It's like they're saying, don't be afraid to push the boundaries, to experiment, to break the rules, which, when you think about it, is a pretty great motto for life in general.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
The key takeaway here is that art is not just a reflection of its time. It's also a catalyst for change.
Oh.
It can challenge our assumptions, inspire us to think differently, and even spark social and political movements.
So it's not just about passively observing art, but actively engaging with it, letting it challenge us, and even using it to shake our own understanding of the world.
Wow. I never thought I'd find so much inspiration in the art of a century ago.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
The art between the world wars is a powerful reminder that art matters. It has the power to move us, to challenge us, to connect us, and to inspire us to create a better world.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive. Any final thoughts for our listeners before we sign off?
As you encounter art from the interwar period, or any period for that matter, don't just look at the surface. Ask questions. Consider the context. Connect with the human stories behind the brushstrokes.
Right.
You might be surprised at what you discover.
And who knows, maybe you'll even be inspired to create some art of your own.
That would be great. After all, we all have stories to tell. And art is a powerful way to share them with the world.
Thanks for joining us on this journey through the art world between the wars.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep creating